Mitch Azaria is back with us again this year, and we're going to talk about another wonderful tripping program that's coming to TVO. Now, Mitch has been around the broadcast industry for a long time, and he's been in front of the camera, he's been behind the scenes, and he's now executive producer of Good Earth Production. And I must tell you, Good Earth Productions has garnered a large number of awards over the years for some of the fine work that they're doing. And the tripping series has certainly been one that people across the province have really embraced. So here we are again, and we say, welcome to Mitch Azaria.
Always fun to be with you, Mike. I feel like this is our annual event. Are we 6 years in now?
I know. That's how I tell the season. You know, oh, it must be March. Mitch is coming back.
It must be spring.
Oh, Mitch, it's always a joy because these TVO programs, which each of them runs about 3 hours long, they always have not only the trip, but they have so much in and around the trip as well. And I'm fascinated to know, where are we going traveling this year?
Yeah, the Muskoka Lakes, and yeah, and I spent 40 years in Toronto. Had never been to Muskoka, so I didn't know what to expect. You hear about it. You hear about Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell and all the famous folks, and then you get up there and you realize, I mean, there's a reason why this place is so famous. I mean, it's stunning. We focused on the big three, Muskoka, Rosso, and Joseph. I mean, yeah, 3 hours is a long time, but you have to make some boundaries, and we decided those were the three lakes, and absolutely stunning, and turned into I think maybe one of the stronger of the programs we've done.
Well, certainly it's a beautiful, fascinating area, and the scenery, which, of course, many of the people in Haliburton can relate to because they have beautiful lakes as well. But it's and I'm astounded you had never been up that way before. A rite of passage to go to Muskoka, for goodness sake.
Yeah, and an hour and a half away, right? It doesn't make sense that I hadn't been there before. And yeah, I mean, the thing that I was taken back with initially, because we went to scout it to begin with to see, and that was sort of early in the season, and it was kind of quiet, and we thought that that was to be expected. But the thing that surprised me most was I thought it would be jammed, like absolutely jammed in July and August, and that the lakes would be busy, the towns would be backed up, the restaurants would be impossible to get into. I don't know if it was just last summer, but it didn't feel that way to me, or maybe my expectations were too high. I felt like there was a lot of open space, there was a lot of quiet on the lake. Surprised how few people were out on their docks, and maybe you experienced this in Haliburton too. Maybe it's because most people own their cottages, and that they're not always out on the dock. They can do that sort of any day, so they're living their lives, right? They're in town, they're playing tennis, they're doing different things. But we'd go by cottages, and maybe 10%, if that, there was activity, in and around the cottage.
That's amazing. I must tell people, Mitch, a little bit about the journey, when it starts and how it's going to appear. April 20th is the date, and it's Tripping the Muskoka Lakes. It'll be on digital via TVO Docs YouTube channel, on the website, and the Smart TV app as well, and then on TVO's broadcast channel as well. That's at 9 p.m. So there's lots of options. Wherever you would like to follow the program, you can choose from those various media selections. Let's talk a little bit, Mitch, about how we travel. I'm assuming we do this by boat.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful locally made boat. It's always important for us to find some really good, interested local folks to sort of take us on this journey. So we're in I think it's a 1954 Playmate, and Playmate was a boat that was kind of a runabout that was made in Port Carling, or built in Port Carling. We're with two local folks. We start off in Gravenhurst, which is an interesting town. Work our way all the way across Lake Muskoka through Port Carling, where there's these terrific locks, self-serve locks, where you literally put $20 into a slot and operate the lock yourself, into Lake Rosso, and then into Lake Joseph, and end at a beautiful historic inn on Joseph. So it's 3 lakes, 3 hours, and the scenery keeps changing, and there's so many surprises. Like, I didn't know that there was the first TB, tuberculosis center hospital was in Muskoka. I didn't know that there's this tiny little bird sanctuary. It's got this great, well, of course, Millionaires Row, Billionaires Row, grand resorts and hotels. I mean, the history, the scenery, it's quite a cruise.
This is a wonderful way for people to be able to see these highlights that you're describing over the 3 hours, to kind of compress the whole thing into that period of time. And I'm sure the scenery along the way, as you go back into the edit stage of the program, you must have been somewhat overwhelmed by the beauty of it all.
Yeah, that's our director, John Morrison, kept saying that. He said, like, this is a great situation, because we've got way more material than we do, time to air. And we had to make some difficult decisions, but what we try and find, because we understand that 3 hours is a massive commitment. But it's a 3 hour drama movie, Mission Impossible or something. I mean, that's one thing to hang in for 3 hours of that. 3 hours of of an immersive boat trip, where you don't have any narration. You're just sort of listening to the scenes. You get 150, now actually almost 200 little pop-up information boards. So that's sort of interesting. We do some animations that take you back in time, as we always do. But we thought, how can we need certain elements to sort of make that 3 hours work. And up there, the elements are, these boathouses, these cottages, and then we go underwater and we see shipwrecks, and then we come above water and and hear about how John Labatt was kidnapped in the 30s, and then we see this beautiful steamship go by us, and like it's just sort of one thing after another, and it's really reflective of how popular and how used those lakes are.
You talk about the devices that you use along the trip, and I think that's part of the joy of the program, because you learn a great deal as you go along, and it helps to explain kind of what we should know about the area that we're looking at. And the history bits, they've proved to be very, very popular. Your team, they do the homework for all these pieces.
Yeah, and I think this year there's 200 of those little pop-up information boards. And I think in our first year on the Rideau Canal, which was 4 hours, we had maybe 70. So there's a lot. And we tell you, it's interesting when you go along and you see a cottage, and then you see the chairs out in the cottage, and you think, well, those are Muskoka chairs, right? But are they? So a little pop-up will come up and say, there's a bit of a debate between, are these Adirondack chairs or Muskoka chairs? And Adirondack actually patented the first chair of that kind in 1905 at a little town in Westport in Adirondack Park. So are they Adirondack chairs? But Muskoka had the tuberculosis centers, and those chairs, because of the way you sit, were perfect design chairs for tuberculosis patients to sit outside. So were they designed in Muskoka? We know there's a patent in Adirondack. We don't know there's a pattern in Muskoka. So my point is that, you know, if you see something and you're curious about it, we're probably going to tell you a little bit more about it. You know, when you go by a boathouse and you see that the boathouse is higher than it is wide, you know, we find out that, you know, that it's a boathouse for a sailboat, which is, you know, very unusual and, you know, fairly rare. And then, you know, you're sort of going along and you're wondering, well, you know, what's underneath the water? And all of a sudden you're under the water and you're watching fish swim around, and you're watching bass react to, you know, to this underwater drone, and you're learning about, you know, the fish underwater. So I think part of our job is to, you know, to anticipate what you're going to be curious about when you're going along on this trip, and sort of answer your, you know, answer the question that you're thinking about. And, you know, we're hoping that there's 200 of those. And kind of like, you know, your neck of the woods, you know, settlement is interesting. You know, how this area became, you know, settled. I know, you know, the Kawarthas were settled in their own way, mostly lumbering and so forth. And in Muskoka, it was settled by, you know, the free land grants. You know that, you know, the government was really interested in sort of settling that whole band in what they considered, you know, sort of northern, you know, northern Ontario. And they figured out, you know, if we can offer, you know, 100-acre free grants, that was a way to do it. Perfect farming ground. So they were, you know, so they told the settlers, and then they came up there and stuck their shovel in the ground and, you know, heard a bang and found out that, you know, that was, you know, Canadian shield and couldn't be farmed, and then turned to lumber. And, you know, eventually, you know, that, you know, people started to come up there to fish and hunt. And these folks who were trying to scratch out a living said, well, you know, we've got an extra room, so stay in our, you know, you can stay at our place. And then more people would come up, they'd build a second room, and then eventually they'd have a little lodge, and then, you know, eventually a resort. And sort of, it's sort of, you could, you know, I love the way places evolve, you know, in terms of settlement. And Muskoka's got a great story to tell.
One of the things that I'm gathering from our conversation is that the development of a tripping story doesn't take place by chance, that there's a lot of pre-production before you put that first boat in the water. How far in advance of actually filming do you start to work on the series?
Yeah, that's a great point, because it looks like such a simple film. It looks like we just took a camera and sort of, you know, went along for, you know, for 3 hours and then turned the camera off and, you know, popped it on the air. But it takes months. I mean, we started planning a month ago for, you know, the next episode, which we won't, you know, even scout for another 3 months. And what we're trying to find is a place that can hold for 3 hours. It has to be, you know, sort of interestingly enough, you know, physically, you know, to, you know, when we shoot it, but also have that great backstory. And, you know, we went up and saw Muskoka. Well, of course, it's, you know, it's beautiful. But, you know, how many stories are there? Well, there's endless amount of stories, endless, from, from the settlement, from, you know, the logging, from the steamships, from, you know, all the wealthy people that came up from, you know, from the US. It sort of just goes on and on. So once you get those, then it goes from being, you know, fast food to slow food, right? It goes from something that you're going to see and forget to something that now you have, you know, information about and background about, that you're going to sort of enrich, you know, that story, and people are going to hold on to it longer and maybe, you know, tell their friends about it. When we've done our job, the local folks are telling each other about parts of what they learned in the documentary. You know, that's when we've done our job, you know, and they say, did you know that, you know, and they've been there their whole lives, right?
That's absolutely lovely. Well, it's obvious from the end results of the series that it is a lot of hard work that's gone into the development and the post-production as well. I would gather that the drones have played a part in this particular program again.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a great tool. You know, there was a time when all we could use was helicopters to get those aerials, and that was both expensive, and there was very little stability. I mean, they eventually got some nice stabilizers, but these drones, and you were telling me the story about doing an interview and then realizing you hadn't hit record. Well, we had that happen to us. We were shooting this really, really complicated drone shot where the drone had to kind of go out over the water, go over this entire resort, come back over the water, and then go over Cleveland's house, which is now an abandoned resort, to sort of, compare this new shiny, Westin resort with this old family resort that couldn't kind of keep up with the times. And it was about a 12-minute shot. And we ran it, and then finally we ran it, and it was the most perfect take. And we were so happy. And just as it ended, the cameraman said, "Oh, I didn't hit record." And there's two ways to react to that, right? I mean, you can either get further down and regret what you didn't get, or you can, say, "Well, that was a great rehearsal. Like, let's go back out and, get the next one." Anyway, we eventually got a take, but that feeling, right? But yeah, no, drones are an amazing tool. I mean, everybody's using them, and we did this one scene that we got the idea from a show called Hacks, which is a great comedy series based in Las Vegas. Well, the opening of their third season, they do this great sequence where the drone comes in from high on the strip, comes through the hotel, through the front door, into the casino, into the lounge, and then eventually, we find the actress, the comedian, up on the stage, and it's all one shot. And we kept thinking, well, how the heck did they get that? And what we realized is, just as it was getting down to the hotel and the front door, someone had to grab the drone and then walked it through the rest of the shot. So we thought, well, we could do this. There's a boat only church on Lake Muskoka, and we thought, okay, if we could come in really high, go across the dock, and then our director could pick up the drone and then walk it into the church while the service was going on. So anyway, it's a cool shot if you get it. If you don't, the director's missing a finger. So anyway, we eventually got the shot, but we love kind of working out those shots, and drones.
Imagine
cool tool.
the director's trepidation as the drone was coming down, and these blades are going crazy. But as you say, the end result, I guess, is the big reward, isn't it?
Yeah, we did paper scissors to find out who was catching the drone and walking.
Let's touch on your production team for a second, because you've had some great people over the years. I would assume some of them are back with you again, and no doubt you've added one or two new folks. Another great team effort on your part.
Yeah, John Morrison's been with us since the beginning. Peter Warren's been, has been shooting it since the beginning. So we've had the same crew. We're really excited about one of our animations this year, because it's a real tragedy of a shipwreck in 1934. It was the only real shipwreck of a steamship on the lake. And our animator recreated the ship and recreated the storm that sort of took it down. And it's a really cool scene because you see this ship and it's sort of going along happily, and then the storm kind of comes in and takes the ship. It kind of hit it broadside and tipped it over, and then it sank quite quickly. But then as it's going down, we also had an underwater drone, and we went down with the ship. And then as we go down, we see the shipwreck sitting. And I think it might be the first time it was shot with an underwater drone. So we see in very, the one thing about Muskoka is the water is very, very murky, right? So this underwater drone had incredible lighting. So we see the Wyoming sitting on the seabed, or the lake bed, in a way that I don't think has ever been filmed before. But it all seems like one continuous, sort of shot. So a tragic story, but
Yeah.
one that I think we paid the proper respect to.
Well, it sounds like another great show coming up, Mitch. Something for everyone to look forward to. And I know it's been so well received that folks have sent you their kudos on the productions. I know the network's really excited. And hey, what can be nicer than going to Ontario's most famous Cottage Lakes area? It's something to look forward to. And after the winter we've had, I think we're about ready to go on Muskoka.
I know the timing's perfect, isn't it? I mean, I feel like seeing a nice summer story and being on a summer lake and being in a mahogany boat and just sort of cruising along and, looking at beautiful cottages and boathouses. Yeah, so you're right.
I'll tell you, Mitch, as jobs go, you've got a dandy. What a nice career. Thanks for joining us today. It's been good to chat with you again, and I can't wait till next year.
Always fun. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Mitch. Mitch Azaria is executive producer with Good Earth Productions, and I want to remind you that it's on TVO. It'll be 9 o'clock Eastern Time on April 20th on the channel, and then TVO will have it as a streaming program as well, also 9 o'clock on the 20th, and it'll be on YouTube and the TVO streaming services. So lots of opportunities. Remember, that's April 20th and tripping the Muskoka Lakes. It's going to be a dandy.